Welcome, my friends, back to the Man Cave and another episode of the Jammin' Dude Show. I am your host, Ben Jammin' Straley, and again I am joined by my co-host, the Black Russian. Glad to have you all back with me. I had intended to pick up some new music. I had ordered the new Hawkins CD. Unfortunately, it got lost in the mail. I never received it and had to receive a full refund. It's too bad, too. I'm really anxious to hear that CD. I'm going to have to try and see if I can buy it from another place. But I'm still very excited because just yesterday I purchased tickets for the upcoming Fates Warning show that's coming up here on December 14th at Studio 7 in Seattle, Washington. The last time they came to Seattle for a headlining show was in 1988 when they were touring for No Exit. Unfortunately, the local music rag, The Rocket, had advertised the wrong day. So I actually ended up missing the show entirely. And I was very bummed out by that. So I have literally waited for 25 years just to see this upcoming show. And I'm really psyched. So I thought I'd dedicate an Unsung Heroes episode to Fates Warning. I have to say that I did not hear of the band. I'm going to go through them very briefly if I can. This was an album. I originally discovered Fates Warning in buying the now famous Best of Metal Blade compilation albums. I was really addicted to those. I was part of the original fan base of the original thrash movement that was coming around in 82, 83, 84. And I discovered so many new bands just by picking up those Best of Metal Blade compilations. Fates Warning, Slayer, Sodom, Destruction. There were so many new bands that were coming out at the time. Fates Warning was one of those that had appeared on Best of Metal Blade Volume 1. One of the tracks was from this first album, Night on Brocken. This is where it all got started. And I have to say, this is probably my least favorite album, but I do still really enjoy. There are some tracks on here I absolutely love, and to this day, when I put together a mixed disc of early stuff, I will still include tracks like The Kiss of Death, and Buried Alive, and The Calling, and of course, the now Fates Warning classic ballad epic, Damnation, which was what first hooked me on Fates Warning. But this was not the first album that I purchased. The first album that I actually purchased was based on another song on that Metal Blade compilation, and that was called The Apparition, and it appears on this album, The Spectre Within. And I bought this on vinyl, and I just thought that cover is so cool. That has got to be one of the most iconic images, and I hope you're not getting too many reflections here. But I absolutely think that this cover is probably what sold me on the album more than anything else. That, and when I went to the local record store, they didn't have Not on Brocken, they did have Spectre Within. So I purchased it, I took it home. It kind of threw me off a little bit at first. Didn't know what to think of it. I mean, I had been listening up to this point to Ozzy Osbourne and Motley Crue before they went into spandex. And so a lot of this proggy stuff was really kind of blowing my mind. I loved Orphan Gypsy, and there were a couple other tracks on here, and of course The Apparition. Some of the others were just weird to me at first. So the album kind of sat on my shelf for a while. I liked it, wasn't sure I loved it. And then it was a couple years later, it was in 1987, that I was dating a wonderful girl, and she owned Awaken the Guardian. And I was like, oh, I've heard of these guys. So I borrowed the cassette, and I don't think she ever got it back. I became completely addicted to Fates Warning with this album, and it actually sent me back to listen to the Spectre Within again, which, once you're used to Fates Warning's sound, once I became accustomed to what was happening, I was completely blown away. Now I was hooked on both of these albums, went back and bought Night on Brocken, and I was a full-blown Fates Warning nut. Completely hooked. Some of my favorites from this album are, of course, the title track, Guardian. Giant's Lore is a personal favorite of mine, as well as Valley of the Dolls and Fata Morgana. So, love this album. This is a classic, and if you're into John Arch, this is probably the greatest album that they ever did with John Arch as their lead vocalist. I questioned whether or not they could ever pull it off with anybody else. I just wasn't sure. When I heard John Arch was leaving and they were recording with somebody else, boy, I had my skeptic doubts. But boy, did they prove me wrong. This album is now so iconic in prog metal history, and I'm sure it had a lot to do with Dream Theater's sound, as they've admitted to Fates Warning being among their early influences. Awaken the Guardian and Into No Exit. There is just no way that the opening track, Anarchy Divine, cannot completely grab you. I was especially impressed with Frank Oresti's composition In a Word, which I also enjoyed as well. And even though it's still, the time shifts are so strange, Shades of Heavenly Death is still to this day one of my favorite tracks from this album. And of course, do not forget their sidelong epic, Ivory Gate of Dreams. Absolutely one of the greatest moments in the history of prog rock. Next, we get to probably my personal favorite of all Fates Warning albums. This holds a special place in my heart. I wasn't exactly sure what was happening with this, but I remember I got an advance copy of 4 tracks. There was only 4 songs on it. It had Chasing Time, Through Different Eyes, Static Acts, and At Fate's Hands. And I had it on cassette, and I wore that cassette out. I was never that big into Through Different Eyes, but the others grabbed me right away. And when I bought the album, I absolutely could not get enough of this. Very different, less metal. But because I had been raised, even though I was going through a big thrash phase when this album came out, because this came out around about the same time the thrash was really hitting its peak, the big 4 were just on top of their popularity, and I had been following them for years, and things were just getting heavier and heavier, and the underground scene was coming along, and things were getting thrashier and heavier, and but this was a little bit more Rush-like, and I was very impressed that Fates Warning would take this course to pull back maybe a little bit from their metal roots and yet not get overly commercial. The compositions on these songs are top-notch, and I still maintain that this is at least in my top 3 all-time Fates Warnings albums. And if you're into Rush at all, especially mid-era moving pictures Rush, I highly recommend finding this album and picking it up, because this is an amazing piece of work. Next would come an album that really put the band on the map. Even though it mildly disappointed me, much like Queensryche's Empire, this was kind of the step in the more commercial direction. After the masterpiece, in my opinion, that was Perfect Symmetry, this seemed maybe a bit radio-friendly to me, but it did succeed in getting that crossover audience as much as Fates Warning was ever going to get, unfortunately, I might add. It did succeed in getting them new fans. Tracks like Eye to Eye, Point of View, they really did gain fans from the more mainstream crowd, and it got people curious about this band that really had a lot more going on to them than just a few radio-friendly singles, because obviously songs like Life in Still Water and the now classic 11th Hour stand out above all others. And again, if you're into Rush, this was produced by Terry Brown and is an excellent piece of work if you're into the more commercial side of prog rock. This is still an excellent album and comes highly recommended from me. After that, they would do what I jokingly refer to sometimes as Parallels Part 2. When Parallels did not take off, the band kept going, but you could tell that it was a big disappointment to them that Parallels, while gaining them their biggest attention so far, obviously it had been their first album with a major label, because at that time actually they had distribution from Warner Brothers Records. Even though it was still on Metal Blade, for a short time Warner Brothers had acquired Metal Blade Records, so this actually was distributed through Warner Brothers. So when they put out that album, they were feeling on top of the world, and they really thought that humongous success was just around the corner. MTV videos, Warner Brothers backing up their album, but of course the grunge movement, like so many, it killed so many other genres, but that was really the record company's fault, and you'll have to see my grunge rant to see how I feel about that. Nevertheless, though, the band labored on, and Inside Out is very similar, maybe a tad darker, and there are some real lost gems on here. Pale Fire is very good. Monument, which is the single, is excellent. And the opening track, Outside Looking In, I really enjoy. The production seems a little thin to me. I found that a lot of these songs, when they're played live, have a lot more punch to them than they do on the studio versions that are represented here on Inside Out. Time to take a break. After Inside Out failed to garner more attention, I really think that a lot of people thought that the band was done. Founding member and original bass player Joe DeBias left. Longtime guitarist and fan favorite Frank Aresti had left, leaving just Ray Alder, the lead singer, Jim Mateos, now the only founding member left, and Mark Zonder, the drummer. And where would they go next? I was actually very surprised to find out that Fate's Warning even still existed in 1997. Because this had come out in 1994 and hadn't done anything. The camp went completely silent. No news was really coming out that I was aware of. I was working in a CD shop, and suddenly, very suddenly, about 3 or 4 months before its actual release, I got a copy from the record company of A Pleasant Shade of Grey. And I remember being really excited that Fate's Warning were still around, but I didn't know what to think. 2 members were gone, and here was this song in my hand that was suddenly, it's like, wow, 1 55-minute long song, huh? Well, after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I immediately played the album again, and again, and again, and again. This was the return of Fate's Warning. They were back in a big way. It was just hard for me to wrap my head around the idea that after 7 albums, and here I believe I'm holding their 8th album? Yes, their 8th album, that they were just hitting their stride. Jim's ability as a songwriter and a crafter and a producer. I mean, Terry Brown is still actually producing, but what an amazing piece of work this is. I couldn't get enough of it. I was working in a CD shop and I literally played this CD every single day. This album completely blew my doors off. I loved it. I didn't think the band was even capable of topping this. And then, well, they did the live album next, which was a lot of fun. Great version of the Ivory Gate of Dreams. Great version of A Pleasant Shade of Grey in its entirety. Even throw us a little bone by having Ray do half of a track from Awaken the Guardian, half of Prelude to Ruin. But then they put out this. I've seen people go both ways on this, but this is my absolute #1 all-time favorite Fates Warning album. Every song on here absolutely blows my doors off. And my favorites are the two long ones, Something from Nothing and Still Remains. And the way it ends with Disconnected Part 2 is one of the most emotional pieces of music that Jim Mateos has ever written. And even Kevin Moore's keyboards, ex-Dream Theater keyboardist Kevin Moore, plays on both of these albums. And the keyboard work that he does, it's my understanding that Jim actually wrote the parts, but the execution, you just can't imagine them being done by anybody else. And this would become the beginning of a beautiful working relationship between Kevin and Jim on their future project, as yet still future project, OSI. But this, to me, is an atmospheric masterpiece on the same level of Dark Side of the Moon. Fantastic album. The band continued on with FWX, their 10th album. I was a little on again, off again with this one. Here Again is probably the best track to me, the opening track. There are some other fantastic moments on this album. Crawl, River Wide, Ocean Deep. Heal Me is another really good track. And then when they didn't do anything for such a long time, I thought they might be done again. But now, with the new album, they've proven me wrong again. They've just taken it to a whole new level. If you haven't seen my review or you haven't picked this album up, please do. This is Fates Warning in top form, and I cannot get enough of it. If you are a fan of good, crafted hard rock, I highly recommend you check out Fates Warning. Although depending on the period that you get, you're almost looking at 3 entirely different bands. The first 3 albums are going to be very Iron Maiden-esque, and if you're into old school Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, maybe with a little bit more time shifting, then you'd be a big fan of the first 3 albums. After that, things get to be a little bit more Rush-like for 2 or 3 albums. No Exit, Perfect Symmetry, Parallels, Inside Out. If you like Rush, really good crafted Rush, you'd like these middle tier albums. After that, it gets to be a little bit more into the atmospheric. We start experimenting with more Pink Floyd meets hard rock. There are long stretches of ambience, and you get a lot of that almost a new age element behind these really great hard rock riffs, so that it creates a feel behind it all. Then you'd really be much more into the later era stuff. A Pleasant Shade of Grey, Disconnected, FWX, and a really good blend of all these sounds in the brand new album, Darkness in a Different Light. I cannot wait to see Fates Warning on December 14th in Seattle. I hope that I can see all of you there too. We're really going to have a great time. And man, I cannot convey to you enough how excited I am to finally be seeing Fates Warning do an entire headlining set after 25 years. So there it is, a brief history of Fates Warning. I hope I haven't bored you too much, but please go out and check out this incredible band and the amazing talent that is Jim Mateos on guitar, Ray Alder, who is an incredible lead singer. He started off being a little bit of a Jeff Tate clone, but really finding himself in the last 2 decades as a lower register singer as well. And he never ceases to impress and amaze me. And I really have to give a J-Dude salute to everybody in the Fates Warning camp. Thank you for giving us 30 years of incredible music. And I'm really looking forward to you wrapping up the Darkness in a Different Light tour right here in Seattle. I feel honored to be even in the audience for such a monumental event. It may be the last time I ever get to see you guys. You never know. I hope not. But until then, I hope I see you guys all at the show, and I'll have a new episode up for you next week. Till then, thank you all. Thank you to everybody in Fates Warning. Thank you to all my regular viewers. Hang in there, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of The Jammin' Dude Show.